Most critical and far-reaching of all wartime shortages was rubber. Rubber for mobile guns, rubber for aircraft, and countless other military and civilian uses. When the Japs captured the chief world sources of rubber in the Far East, our government turned to our sister republics in Central America, where both wild and cultivated rubber is found. This is the pictorial record of a trip to the rubber-producing regions of Nicaragua and Costa Rica, sponsored by the Coordinator's Office of American Affairs. Members of the expedition, Sullivan C, Richardson and Arnold Whitaker, traveled in a Dodge four-wheel drive Army truck. And this is their story, as told by Mr. Richardson.
To reach the areas we'd been assigned to explore, we entered Mexico at Laredo, Texas, and followed the well-paved Pan-American Highway through Monterrey to Mexico City. This is a completed portion of the great intercontinental road that will eventually make it possible for tourists to drive their cars from our southern border to Cape Horn at the very tip of South America. As we passed through Monterrey, we paused long enough to visit the ruins of an old church located on Bishop's Hill. This ancient edifice was turned into a fort by Pancho Villa during the Mexican Revolution of 1912. In Mexico City, we photographed the great Aztec stone calendar, which stands in front of the main doorway of the National Museum. Nearby rests an ancient Aztec sacrificial stone, which records the history of the conquests of King Tizoc. Outside of the capital city, we visited the ruins of the gigantic Temple of the Sun, another survival of Aztec culture, which rises 700 feet above the plain. It is famous for its wall of carved serpents in vari-colored stone, and these are said to represent the great white god of the Aztecs. The Pan-American Highway has not yet been extended through southern Mexico, and there are many uncompleted stretches through Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. Sometimes our route carried us over rough ox cart trails, where our progress was exasperatingly slow and uncomfortable. At other times, we drove over grassy, roadless plains and rocky plateaus, where we were glad of the power and traction of our staunch Dodge truck. But by far, our worst enemy was mud, and many times we found ourselves in situations like this, which would have been hopeless if our truck had not been equipped with a powerful winch that frequently pulled us out of wheel-deep mud holes. At one point, it took us 4 days to do only 15 miles, and we used the winch at least 10 times each day. The time is not far distant, however, when such conditions will have been eliminated. In cooperation with the United States government, the Central American republics are rapidly completing the highway that will give us an overland connection with the Panama Canal. Bulldozers are tearing their way through thick virgin jungle, clearing out the trees and underbrush so that grading and surfacing can follow. These scenes are typical of what is being accomplished in southern Costa Rica, where the road winds through the Paso de la Muerte, or Pass of Death, sometimes at an elevation of 11,000 feet. Fills like this frequently are necessary as the new road twists its incredible way on the brink of deep canyons, where a false move can send a bulldozer or truck crashing into the depths. Huge scrapers, graders, carryalls, trucks, and rock crushers are at work as this urgent road building program is being pushed to completion. Our destination in Costa Rica was the Speedway Plantation, established by the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company for the cultivation of rubber trees and the development of hybrid types to produce higher yielding and stronger disease-resistant trees. The seeds of the rubber tree are small, hard balls about the size of a walnut. From these seeds, the young plants seen in this nursery are grown. They must be sprayed frequently to prevent a disease which attacks and eats away the leaves. In order to produce a high-yielding, disease-resistant tree, grafting is used extensively on the Speedway Plantation. The method used is to plant seeds from a strong, disease-resistant but low-yielding tree. And when this is grown sufficiently, a bud from a high-yielding tree is grafted to it. Later, a disease-resistant top is grafted on. so that the adult trees on the Speedway plantation are really 3 trees in one. The mature trees seen in this grove are of the hybrid type. They are planted wide apart so as to give each tree the fullest benefit of air and sunlight. These trees are tapped for their milk or latex by scraping off only about a 1/16 of an inch of bark at a time. This results in only a small amount of latex at each cutting, but the method permits tapping a single tree 80 to 85 times a year, thus producing a maximum yield. As the milky latex drips from the tree into small bowls, it is collected by the plantation workers and carried into the coagulating and curing sheds. Here it is strained to remove leaves, bits of bark, and other particles of foreign material. Following this, it is tested with a hydrometer to determine the rubber content. Then the latex is poured into shallow pans and mixed with a small quantity of acid. Almost immediately, it coagulates to form a solid curd-like mass, which can be lifted out and passed through a wringer to remove the acid. Finally, this finest and purest type of raw rubber is cured by smoking to preserve it and give it a rich golden brown color. And here we see a 200-pound bale ready for shipment to the Goodyear factories at Akron, Ohio. Our chief interest, however, was in wild rubber. And to plan our trip into the jungles where it is to be found, we visited the office of the Rubber Development Corporation at Managua in Nicaragua. Here we conferred with Mr. Joseph Apodaca and Mr. Robert Hutchins, chiefs of the Rubber Development Program, and from them we learned about Rubber River. Its real name is the Cocoa River, and to it, Mosquito Indians working in the jungle bring raw rubber to be picked up and brought out to coastal shipping points. We would go by airplane to the headwaters of the river and return by boat through the wild rubber country. Early next morning, our equipment was loaded into a small 4-passenger plane, and a few minutes later we were in the air, looking down on the city in the blue waters of Lake Managua. The flight was pleasant and uneventful, and as we landed at a rough jungle airstrip near the headwaters of the river, we were met by a large group of native cutters coming in with their packed bulls loaded with rubber. A piece of this rubber is slashed open to determine its quality and also to see how much dirt and other foreign matter it contains. The native cutters have only the most primitive equipment, and they rarely strain the latex. Their favorite method is to pour the milk into a hole in the ground, and as a result, the slabs of rubber they bring in are full of all kinds of impurities. The shotgun carried by this cutter was used to kill the tiger whose skin Paul Taylor is examining. There are many of these dangerous cats in the jungle, and they do not hesitate to attack the rubber workers. When the rubber brought in by the natives had been loaded, our plane took off for the return trip to Managua, leaving us to begin our 8-day journey down Rubber River. The boat we used was fitted with a canvas top to protect us from the sun and also from rainstorms that are to be met with even in the so-called dry season. As we poled downstream through the shallow water characteristic of the river during the dry season, we passed mile after mile of dense jungle, broken now and then by high bluffs and tiny native settlements. Rubber River is the best and safest thoroughfare through this region, and we met many native pit pans, which are long, narrow dugouts hollowed out of trees. 3 natives poled one of them up to our boat to bargain for their 4-day take of rubber. Some of it is what is called baruco and is composed of long strips of rubber torn from the trenches cut into the trees. The heavier flat slabs called coagulum result when the latex is coagulated in holes in the ground or in troughs made for the purpose. When we came to deeper stretches of the river, our boat captain, Ishmael, used the outboard motor to save our men the labor of poling and paddling. This long pit pan is one of the floating commissaries that ply the river, bringing chickens, turkeys, rice, corn, beans, and other supplies to the native cutters who work in the jungle. Permanent commissaries like this one also are established along the river, but they are too far apart for the natives to reach them easily. As soon as we could find the opportunity, we landed from our boat and went into the jungle with 2 Mosquito Indians to watch them tap a wild rubber tree. After clearing the underbrush away from the base of the tree, a leaf is inserted under a chip of bark to act as a spout. Then the cutter climbs the tree and cuts deep, crude trenches into the trunk with a machete, a very different method than we had seen used for cultivated trees on the Speedway plantation. A flood of milk runs down the central vertical trench and drips off the leaf spout into the bowl. The equipment of these native cutters is simple and primitive, consisting of a few ropes, a latex bag, machete, shotgun, and climbing spurs. Their tattered clothing is blackened by spatterings of rubber latex. They live their entire lives in this torrid jungle, housed in squalid, tumble-down shacks, but they know little or nothing of the outside world and seem quite contented with their way of life. Our guide, Paul Taylor, undertakes to show this cutter the proper way to coagulate latex. They strain a quantity from the latex bag into one of our cooking pans. And here we see a close-up of the strainer full of dirt and chips. The natives have no acid to use for coagulating, but they find a fairly good substitute in the strands of jungle growth called moon vine. This is crushed by pounding with a rock and then washed and wrung out in water to extract the acidy juice. When this concoction is mixed with the latex, coagulation begins almost immediately, and the result is a slab of pure white rubber, which the native cutter holds up and stretches. Each day, as our journey downstream continued, we realized more fully the value of this artery of easy travel through the trackless jungle. Pit pans moved up and downstream constantly through quiet waters and swift rapids. Here is one that amazed us with the load it carried. Men and women crowded into it until it was so low in the water that only an inch or two of freeboard remained. Commissary boats were a common sight, often moored at the bank of the river where groups of natives came down to buy their supplies. Our meals on the river were somewhat monotonous, mostly beans, rice, and flapjacks with pickles and marmalade to add a little variety. Dishwashing was an easy chore, just a matter of scrubbing them with ashes and a good rinsing over the side of the boat. We made frequent stops to visit native cutters in the jungle and along the river bank. In some instances, their facilities were better than average, like this one, which was equipped with strainers, a trough, a supply of acid, and a wringer. As a result, their rubber was cleaner and of much better quality than usual. We're on the last lap of our Rubber River adventure now, as our boat shoots the rapids leading to a waterfall. Around this, our dunnage must be portaged, while the boat is taken through a canal. Safely past this dangerous swift water, we come out into the broad, quiet stretches of the lower river. Larger settlements along the river bank indicate that we're nearing civilization again. Our last stop is the village of San Carlos. Here, almost the entire population troops down to meet us and have their pictures taken. Pit pans and large rafts are pulled in, bringing cargoes of raw rubber to be picked up and sent to the seaport for shipment to the United States. Our own flag and the flag of Costa Rica fly side by side over the village, reminding us that cooperation between these nations has helped us to get supplies of rubber so vitally needed for our war effort.